Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I am here in my glass house on a May gray day in North San Diego. And I wanted to record a follow-up fueling and training video presentation for you, the aging endurance athlete. Now, this podcast has been around for 12 years, originally called Fit Fast, Eat Fat to Burn Fat. And through the years, we've really evolved. Podcast, Low Carb Athlete. I more like to focus on carb timing, strategic carb timing, eating real food, getting rid of the junk, getting rid of the inflammatory foods, and really timing your fuel for what zone you are training in. And I did this PowerPoint presentation a year ago, and just wanted to go over this presentation in pieces because there's a lot to it. As I am doing Pinoy metabolic testing on clients or people in North San Diego, and I take it places. The math method is Phil Maffetone. Dr. Maffetone taught us this years ago. So we're going to go into a little bit of the math method to figure out your zone 2 training. If you can't get someone as myself to do your Pinoy metabolic testing, remember I did do metabolic testing starting back in 2005 on and off through 2012 when New Leaf, the company I use, their testing equipment, their testing cart, was purchased by Lifetime Fitness and the company dissolved. Then New Leaf dissolved, and then Pinoy, I met them in 2019 and finally purchased a kit recently, a year ago finally, but it took me 5 years to make the investment decision. So math method, MAF, max aerobic function heart rate. This is how we can figure out how to train to build your zone 1. Maffetone, you can look up MAF 180, personalized exercise heart rate. And we talked to Phil Maffetone when this podcast first started. And myself, my personal experience, heart zone training I did with Sally Edwards back in, oh my gosh, 1995. And really have done heart rate training for a long time. I started doing triathlons in the 1995s, but Ironman I started doing 2000, 2001, and started training with Mark Allen and using this heart rate training with Maffetone 180 minus your age. And then I started getting my real zone 2 by doing the metabolic testing cart. So if you're not familiar with what zone 2 is, since it's such a buzzword, it's something we've talked about as endurance athletes in our world for many years, 30 years, I know. So we've got our base where we build up that aerobic engine. And then we have this max heart rate or your aerobic fat max. And then we have that aerobic to anaerobic. It's not either or. That's kind of old school now. We don't say aerobic or anaerobic. There's always a blend. If you look at my other videos when I do Pinoy metabolic testing, that you're burning some carbohydrates here, mostly fat, and then you start to shift burning more carbohydrates and less fat, and then the fat drops off. But the carbs are always being somewhat there, and the intensity increases. So we want to look at heart rate, your VO2 max, your peak. RER is the respiratory exchange ratio. I'll talk a little more about. So we talk about the Goldilocks effect as athletes, endurance athletes, low intensity, the LSD is low sustained distance, endurance training zone. This is where you can get that mitochondria benefits. This is where you can recover down on zone 1 from high intensity training, and where you get more resilience to oxidative stress, which causes aging, which a lot of us have too much oxidative stress from training in our life. But then we've got the other side of it is the anaerobic HIIT training, which is, a big thing. How much should you do in each zone? And that's where we want to personalize it based on what you are doing, what's working for you now. What are your goals? What do you visualize yourself doing in the next year, 5 years? And how do you see yourself living life when you're older, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old? So working on that, what I like to say lately is the aging athlete, so we can strive to thrive as we age and not struggle. So anaerobic I said it's not really what we call anaerobic, aerobic, but HIIT training is more that higher intensity, more carbohydrate fuel source, glycolysis, and the sprint interval training is more the creatine phosphate energy system that we see in some later slides or different videos. And this requires a little more recovery. And this is where I like to tie in my genetic report. Hey, I need a little more recovery. I need to do one hard, high intensity workout, but I need 3 days easy in between before I do another hard one again. Part of that's intuitive. My body just doesn't want to go do sprints this day. So I know I need more recovery without having to look at a report or look at my Oura ring. Listen to your body, which we should always do as well as looking at all this data. Now, next, we can go into fasted or fed exercise. This has really evolved over the last 5 years. And we talked about doing fasted exercise, especially us that wake up in the morning and go work out. I just have a coffee, put some heavy cream in, but should I add calories? Should I eat something beforehand? So it's experimenting what works best for you. Men are different than women, and women are going to be different times of the month. So this is kind of what we've talked about years ago, but it's funny how things change. We look at fasted exercise, but I think when this came out, this is, I don't know how many years ago, 2018. So it's a little bit outdated, but I think the benefits of fasted exercise are a zone 1 workout. And Ben Greenfield, I work from as a coach. We would always say this. This is a fasted workout. As say you go on Sunday for a long hike. It is low heart rate, not upper zone 2 even. You're not doing up zone 2 up to zone 5. That's not the workout that we're doing fasted. So yes, some people burn more fat, but actually I've read articles that you don't necessarily burn more fat fasted or fed. It's looking at, do you perform better? So that's a question you need to ask yourself. Should I eat or should I not eat is where it gets complicated. And I find it personally hard because I don't really like to eat in the morning before I work out. So when should you eat? Here's another chart I have from Precision Nutrition. If your workout is shorter than 90 minutes, if it's longer than 90 minutes, now let's break that down. If it's shorter than 90 minutes, if your intensity is low, zone 1 to zone 2, if we want to translate that into zones, where is my fuel source starting muscle glycogen? So this is a great conversation because what we've talked about over the years, if you had a good dinner the night before morning workout, you have filled up your muscle glycogen. Your liver glycogen is probably lower from overnight fast. Now, so maybe your starting muscle glycogen levels are lower to normal. So your pre-exercise nutrition is fasted, or maybe you have a little bit of protein in there. This is where I like using essential amino acids. I'm going to be burning fat if I'm doing this zone 1, zone 2 workout. The flip side, if I'm doing a shorter than 90-minute high intensity workout, zone 3, 4, zone 5, my starting glycogen level is normal. Maybe I can benefit performance-wise to have some nature's carbs, not processed foods, not wheat, not refined sugars, not filled with vegetable oils, and something with a bunch of ingredients you can't read half of it and has a bunch of guar gums and crap in it, and some protein. So this is why I find it challenging to figure out, okay, all right, then what should I eat? I like having an S Fuels bar or a Laird's superfood bar. It has mushroom adaptogens in it. The benefits here, aerobic capacity cell signaling. Now, when we're starting to go a little longer, maybe it's a tempo workout. Maybe you've got some race pace in it, or you're staying in zone 1, 2 the whole workout. And then we look at some different pre-nutrition fuel. Now, this is from Precision Precision Nutrition. Now, that's one suggestion. Again, there's not one size fits all. There's not some menu saying this is what everyone needs to do, because men are different. Women are different than other women because of different hormone cycles and different stages in life. So we need to customize it. All right. So if we did a metabolic test, we're going to find out your VO2 max or your VO2 peak. We can identify where your fat burning is, your metabolism, doing a resting metabolism test and an exercise test. We can find out how well you are working your intervals, or maybe you're not doing interval training correctly, not coming down to your zone 1. So that's a recovery capacity. So testing is ideal. We can get all these biomarkers in a report and figure out how well you burn fat. How is your performance looking? How is your longevity? And I think that's the main focus area on metabolic testing of peak VO2 max, is looking at longevity mortality risk based on the fact that I just heard Dr. Casey Means on Huberman Lab podcast today. I was listening to part of it my drive home, that it's like 80% of people are obese. It's just insane number. How many people are metabolically unhealthy? How many people are insulin resistant? So this says 6 in 10 adults in the US have chronic disease, and 4 in 10 adults have 2 or more heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, which is why I want to get Dr. Casey Means' new book, because think of all this. This is preventable, a lot of it. Look at the precision medicine, that clarity report I went over. We can help improve the aging process by taking ownership of our health now and avoid these diseases. So a breath analysis test at rest tells us our metabolism, and you can do an exercise test. So you can look at that a little more. We're looking at how well do you breathe, as well as how well are you using fat and carbohydrates at rest. And then we're looking at your resting metabolic rate. If you're exercising, we're looking at your fat burned, carb burn by what's called the RER measurement. Now, I was just doing a call with Lumen, and they have a breath device. Also, I've used Biosense, did a podcast with them a couple years ago. You're looking at the respiratory exchange ratio, looking at how many carbs and fat you burn at rest and during exercise, and we can measure that. And that can give us good feedback on how you metabolize your fuel. So PNOE itself, it means breath. It's a breath analysis machine measuring how well your heart, lungs, cells, blood circulation, metabolism work individually, but also together. As we know, all those parts has to work together as a team. So how can metabolic testing help you? We get the biological age, VO2 max, metabolic rate, your fat burn efficiency will help us figure out a different formula for your biological versus chronological age. So we've done podcasts with true age, which is DNA methylation. Look, more of my saliva tested would measure how I am aging. So this is measured with your oxygen and carbon dioxide measured. Okay. So we can also find out your cardiovascular score in a PNOE test and get this report. So how well do you score? How is it measured? What do you need to improve? Well, this person needs to improve their cardiovascular, so we can figure out, okay, what are you doing now? What do we need to adjust? What's good for you? So a good result of a cardiovascular report, for example, this can help us figure out, all right, what do you need to do more of or less of? How we can change and tweak your program. So great information, how your training program's going. Maybe you need to do a little less zone 2, or maybe you need to do a little less speed work, or maybe you need to do your speed work differently. You're not actually doing it. You're just in zone 3. So then we look at the aerobic health markers and more. So that's just a little sample of the reports. Now, fuel usage, again, I was saying how we can figure out fat to carbohydrates. But as endurance athlete, we obviously want to be in the fat fueling tank and be metabolically flexible, that we can dip into this glycogen tank, but not stay there because it's limited, 2,000 calories. And then we can go back into the fat tank. So how do we do that? Well, we improve our metabolic efficiency, ability to burn fat first, and then we work on doing a little fat reset we can go into, or you can find my previous videos on Dr. Dan Plu's program that we learned in the Endure IQ program for coaching how to help people be fat burners. So as I went through the max fat threshold, we can find during the test, or we can do this in a formula and guess with the Maffetone max aerobic age. But just remember that each person switches their fuel source differently. So understanding how your body utilizes fats and carbs during exercise as well as at rest is essential for figuring out how to optimize your nutrition plan. So different training intensities and sports require varying amounts of fuel sources. So if you know, instead of gas, we test fuel usage patterns, we can strategically plan your nutrition. You can do this yourself, plan your own nutrition plan with the right macros to support your energy needs. So allowing performance, prevent fatigue, and optimize recovery. But I must say that a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I'm not an athlete. I don't need this test. I'm not trying to promote metabolic testing to athletes. I really want people to be more motivated to improve the aging process. Athlete, whatever level you are, doesn't matter. You should know this information so you can have baseline data and how to improve it. So the respiratory exchange ratio is what we do during the resting metabolic rate during exercise. This is what Lumen is using. VO2, whoops, where am I? So go backwards. So respiratory exchange ratio, RER, is exchange ratio. So we've got the RER closer to 0.7, showing primarily fat is used. 0.8 to 0.85 is a mixture. 1.0 or above the carbohydrates. So if we know that, that's the formula, the VO2 and CO2 divided by each other is a respiratory exchange ratio. So that's how we can figure out this fuel source, what you are burning, fat to carbohydrates. Now, you can listen to my interview with Joe Friel on lactate. We're burning some lactate all through our resting and exercise test, but do you need to know that? How much? I'd rather know where my fat burning and metabolic crossover point is. So we've got fatty acids, triglycerides used by breaking down fatty acids, triglycerides stored in adipose tissue, transported to the muscle cells. They undergo that complicated Krebs cycle by beta oxidation, produce acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA enters the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation generates ATP. So that's how we burn fat for fuel. Now, I'll add the note here. Each molecule of fatty acid can produce a larger amount of ATP. Remember, that's our energy source compared to glucose, yielding about 129 ATP molecules per 16 carbon fatty acid. Look on this other side of the chart. Glucose and glycogen metabolized through glycolysis to produce pyruvate, which enters the Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation pathways in aerobic metabolism to create ATP. But glycolysis metabolism, each molecule of glucose can produce a net gain of 2 ATP, 129 or 2. So go back to that fuel. I want to burn that slow burning fat fuel log or fast burning kindling carbohydrate fuel log. So then we have lactate burning more and more as we go higher intensities. So during higher intensity exercise, oxygen demand exceeds supply. We get to more anaerobic glycolysis, produce ATP at a faster rate, and glucose is converted to pyruvate and then to lactate. But what's interesting research on lactate, that it's not what we'll talk here about, is lactate is not a metabolic waste. It's utilized by muscles and tissues. It's recycled back as fuel. So lactic acid buildup is not what we thought it was. It's more the acidicness of our blood that creates that burn, not lactic acid. So lactate can be utilized as fuel source by muscles, other tissues. It can also be transported to the liver where it's converted back to glucose through gluconeogenesis. So everyone know how you learn this in school. Gluco means sugar, glucose. Neo means new. Genesis, create something new. So neogenesis, gluconeogenesis. So metabolism lactate does not directly generate ATP, but rather helps maintain energy balance, support continued exercise performance. And then when we do our sprint interval training, the fuel source is creatine phosphate. So that's our rapid energy reserve. Creatine stored in our muscles, used in a short burst and high sprinting weightlifting. Now, creatine phosphate stores high energy phosphate bonds. They can be rapidly transferred to ADP to generate ATP. So good thing I have these slides because I can never remember all this off by heart, but provide quick source of energy for muscle contraction. So note the word creatine phosphate metabolism does not directly generate ATP, but acts as a buffer to maintain ATP levels during rapid energy demands. Creatine phosphate does not contribute to oxidative stress or metabolic waste. It serves as rapid energy reserve, helps maintain ATP levels through short bursts, high intensity activity. Another reason to have creatine, especially women, we don't make as much or we don't store as much. Go back and listen to Dr. Stacy Sims and all the many podcasts right now on creatine, but women actually need to supplement with creatine more than men, and also the benefits of brain health. So we needed another episode on that. One side note I always like to add in: women that are cycling, best time to test is like after your cycle ends, before ovulation. Recovery during luteal phase, that late phase, I wouldn't be doing a metabolic test. All right, so we'll talk about fasted exercise again. So what is fasted exercise? What we want to look at for athletes is 8 to 12 hours is your overnight fast. So your liver, when you wake up, will be empty of glycogen, but we have those muscle glycogen stored from overnight. So protein repair mechanism begins to kick in as growth hormone testosterone. So 4 to 5 hours after eating lunch, then going to work out before dinner. This is from Ben Greenfield's podcast or blog, I think 2018. Oh, it was a lecture he did for what's his name? Drawing a blank, but yeah, it was a good lecture. I listened to this interview a few times on fasted exercise. So ideally fasted exercise. What has changed? I think this is what Ben said years ago, and I think this is what we have to remember. Even if fasted 4 to 5 hours, eating lunch, then going to work out before dinner, intermittent fast is 8 to 12 hours, or say 8 p.m. you stop eating to 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. lunch. Say you're eating around 1 or 2, then you have dinner. I don't see, for me, I'm not going to eat dinner at 7. I'm winding down, getting ready to go to bed at 8 o'clock. So this is where you have to customize. This was an example. Ideally, exercise early in the evening when the body's in prime condition. I work out in the morning. I'm not in prime condition in the morning to exercise, but that's when it works best in my schedule. So what is the best time of day to exercise? When you will do it. I also go to master swimming 3-4 days a week at lunchtime. It takes a big chunk out of my workday, but I feel better afterwards. I have a social break. It's where I meet my friends. So I have community. That is really what's helped me, especially moving from Seattle to San Diego. Solana Beach is where I go swim masters, and that if I don't go have that break, I'm kind of grumpy. I'm not productive if I work all day at home. Like Tuesday or Thursday, I don't go swimming, and it's amazing the energy. So I feel more productive, even though it takes 2.5 hours out of my day. But exercising at lunchtime is what works for me to be focused and better the rest of the day. But then I have to work on my nutrition. So timing, what time to eat. I really adjusted this from my previous years. I was fasting and not eating until 10 or 11 in the morning, but then I swim at 11:45. So then I'd be eating too close to swimming and then regurgitating what I ate while swimming, especially if I was trying to do more protein. So that doesn't work. So I've reshifted my fueling window. Basically, I do something in the morning, then swim at lunch. Those days, I need to eat around 8 a.m. and not wait as I was doing a 16-hour fast. So this information is valid as morning sunrise walk, easy swim, do a sauna. You have a natural cortisol response in the morning. So if you do a Dutch test, your cortisol should be higher in the morning. Your blood glucose will be higher in the morning because of cortisol. So we don't need to activate our sympathetic nervous system in the morning when cortisol is already at its peak in the morning. It's naturally elevated if your cortisol rhythm is optimal which most of us are not. We usually have extremely high cortisol above normal or really low. So adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion, so to speak. So this information is where we kind of will work on personalizing it. Okay. So as an athlete, I learned this when I first started diving into this stuff 4 years ago. Rob Wolf said, athletes, why are we fasting? Right? You're trying to hit performance goals. Dr. Stacy Sims says same thing. Why women are low energy availability? We're not eating enough already. So athletes, fasted training is controversial. It works for some, but not for others. Stressed. If you're already stressed out, fasting. Hello, everyone. This is why I stopped. Fasting, like exercise, is a stressor. If you are doing so many different external hormetic stressors, they accumulate and they end up being excessive and chronic. So some people, as myself, can't tolerate as much stress. If you look at your genetic report, the COMT genes, some other ones. So if you're already overwhelmed with life and financial stress and work stress, family, life gets in its way. But if you're adding extra stressors as not eating enough, exercising intensely too frequently, not getting your sleep, and all of that, it's a little too much. Now, females, it's said that if you're already stressed from heavy training, work demands, as I just said, personal concerns, ease up on fasting. Your body will appreciate it. Hormonally, men and women are different. Longer fasted periods are not suggested for, not period, but period of fasting are not suggested for women. So they were talking, Rob Wolf, Ketogains about 4 or 5 years ago, that fasting more the 12-12 approach for women and 16-8 intermittent fasting protocol might be okay for some people, but what I've learned for us athletes, men and women, that the 12-hour fasting window's enough to give digest rest. More than that, I don't think we get enough calories in, and we don't hit our protein goals. That's why I completely changed my eating schedule the last year and stopped doing intermittent fasting, 16-8 and a 24-hour fast. Stopped doing that so strictly last couple years. I wasn't fueling my workouts that where I'm just trying to do more speed work, more heavy lifting, more intensity when I'm recovered. And I'm trying to hit those protein goals. So if I'm doing a 16-8, I'm not getting enough in. Plus, we're typically working out more than once a day. So lots of episodes on that if you want to go back into my archives on the Low Carb Athlete podcast. So men might be better, 12 to 16 hours. Women, still with hormone cycle, 12 to 15 hours. When to eat or not to eat, we talked about this already, but if you want to look at that a little more, you can save that and read it. But again, this is from Ben's seminar a few years ago. It depends, I think, on the intensity of the workout. When did you last eat? Are you eating enough? Women want to watch out. We're more glycogen depleting sessions. If you see a drop in hormone production, that kisspeptin hormone we've talked about. So here it is. The hormone kisspeptin is more sensitive in women than men if it disrupted sex hormones are not produced, so they should be. So if the brain perceives deficiency in nutrients, especially carbohydrates, for women, we have a marked reduction in kisspeptin stimulation, which can increase appetite and reduce sensitivity to insulin. Some research shows intermittent fasting may cause impaired glucose intolerance in women, but not men. So, women, if you're still fasting, because we talked about this the last 4 or 5 years, eat. Maybe I don't eat before my workouts in the morning, but I do add some heavy cream to my coffee, and I add some Redmond sea salt and some collagen peptides, so it's not completely fasted. Probably could use maybe a little something, but I'm usually not hungry that early because it's still 5 in the morning. So another thing Rob Wolf said on his previous fasting articles is fasting keeps blood sugar and insulin levels low. So fasting is great for people. But if you are fit and active, Yes, autophagy is great. We want that for longevity. But when autophagy is compromised, the risk of degenerative disease rises. Fasting flips on the longevity program for free. So he talks about in previous podcasts he's done and articles. You can look up Rob Wolf, his fasting guide ebook on his website. Coffee, strength training, and getting some sun enhances autophagy. So we don't need to depend just on fasting to hit cell autophagy. All right. So Dr. Dan Plews, you probably know of. He is on the board for S Fuels and he has his company, Endure IQ. I've done 2 of their coaching programs and learned a lot. Dan Plews talks about in the Endure program on fasted exercise that fasted training and training with low glycogen availability are beneficial for improving adaptation to training and fat adaptation. Training too much with low energy availability can lead to hormone disruption. The female athlete triad comes from low energy availability, which is, if you haven't heard, LEA is what it's called. Male endurance athletes can also experience this because we tend to exercise again and not eat enough. So you want to make sure your daily energy deficit is not too low. This is where I'd suggest coming to get a metabolic test to figure out your resting metabolism, how many calories you are burning at rest. Because a lot of times I test athletes, and if we can put in their body fat, lean body mass, fat mass, we'll know that you're not burning or you're not eating enough. Okay, so let's move on. Now, I think it's important to look at the nutrition parts. I'm not going to dive into all this fasted exercise. You can go back to previous videos, but it's really just wanted to show how much has evolved over the years. All these people have different recommendations, but remember, N=1 experiment. You are the expert of you. Your life stressors are different, your training schedules, your feeding schedules. So don't try to do what someone else is doing, maybe as a template, and then course correct and experiment. But if you are wearing a heart rate monitor and you know your training zones and what type of intensity, what fuel source you're burning, what the purposes of the workout, if you need to eat differently. So looking at endurance training, sometimes it doesn't change your calories, your fat burn. I've heard it's more your performance. So if you're concerned about performance, then you need to fuel for that. So we did say in the past, everyone said training exercise increases glucose sensitivity, mitochondrial adaptations to to fatty acids, increases genes for fatty acid metabolism, that we blunt fatty acid uptake, and robust mitochondria use fatty acids to fuel. So should you eat before or not? Should you take essential amino acids? I think this is where we need to experiment what works best for you. So if doing a fasted workout, you haven't eaten for 16 hours, you're not storing protein, doing a fasted strength workout, you may need to consume protein more so post-workout. So Dr. Rhonda Patrick interview from her a few years ago. I'm sure everyone says something different though now, right? Okay, so lots on fasting. You can go back and read these later. They're on my ebooks on the website. And more guidelines. So I think what I am summarizing, if you are doing a workout that's just easy, zone 1, zone 2, low intensity, it's okay to not eat in a morning workout. If you are trying to get performance gains, you want to get faster, you're doing speed workout, you may benefit performance-wise to add something to that morning cup of coffee or have a little shake or something easy to digest. If you're like me, you don't want to eat anything, but just something quick and easy. As S fuels, you can, different options. So I can go into that. Now, how should you train and how do you get to be fat adapted? Go back to these previous videos. Dr. Dan Plews talks about back in the day, we talked about ketogenic diet, but this is kind of, I think, switched. People are more carnivore now because look at this protein. We eat so much ketogenic food plan with 60, 85% fat. Carbs are down 20 to 50, which might be same for some people carnivore. They're doing 0 grams to some, light, little bit of carbs, but protein's up to more 20%. And then we have metabolically flexible athlete. Maybe they're adding in 100 to 200 grams of carbs, adding in more fat, and then we're hitting that protein goal, the 20, 25%. So not saying keto's out, but maybe it's out for athletes. Being a nutritional ketosis that low. I think what people need to be reminded of the last few years is that we need that protein for muscle protein synthesis, for avoiding sarcopenia. We need to combine that with lifting heavy weights and not doing so much chronic cardio, especially as endurance athletes. So there's benefits of being fat adapted. So there's lots of articles in the past about that and many videos. There's tips for training low, doing a zone 1 workout without eating anything, maybe just some fat coffee. But it is different for everybody. And do you need to be fat adapted? I can tell you from when I do the metabolism test and look at your blood chemistry panel, including insulin, we want to look at how well you're burning fat now. Do we need to go to a fat adaptation program and add in some carbs, but focus on titrating those in and out around your workouts? So the greater intensity of exercise, the greater reliance of muscles and on carbohydrates to fuel the movement. So eat your carbs around your high intensity sessions as strength training intervals, anything zone 3, 4, and 5 to get most out of that. So being fat adapted is great for your endurance training. So you can go longer and not bonk and depend on carbs and having to keep fueling. But we need to not avoid nature's carbs, avoid the crap, the junk, the processed foods. But we need to be able to be not scared of avoiding protein or avoiding carbohydrates, focusing on protein and fat, but that we can have some berries and you can have some sweet potatoes if they work for you. You can have some root vegetables. You can have some good broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, stuff like that. So just to review this article, the role of training in a fat adapted state, it says try and keep it simple when training for endurance. Ultimately, it is the actual endurance training that will cause physiological adaptations that result in being able to perform at higher intensities for longer durations. That includes the body's increasing its ability to use fat as fuel, as the main fuel source, regardless of carb intake. The number one driver for fat adaptation is training. To train low carb, have low carbs available. This is when you're in a fasted state or lower carbohydrate intake. This is shown to further increase physiological adaptations, including your body's ability to use fat as fuel when training at low zone 1, 2 intensities. So when you're doing zone 1 and 2, the carbohydrates ingested before, during endurance exercise to low moderate zone 1 and 2 reduces the body's ability to use fat as fuel source. The goal of every endurance athlete should be to train the body to use a combination or greater contribution of fat as the main fuel source than carbohydrates when you're in zone 1, 2. Now, this is added benefit. This article says reducing the body's reliance on eating carbohydrates during exercise, endurance exercise, sparing your muscle glycogen stored in your muscle. This enables you to tap into your carbohydrate store when you need it most during the higher intensity moments, on steep climbs, when you pick up the pace, strenuous moves. This is fat adaptation. This is from uphillathlete.com. I would add to this that I found when I'm doing metabolic testing, if you can have someone as myself near you to test what happens to your fuel source of fat to carbohydrate if you ate something. Do the metabolic test with that fuel source. Compare it fasted and experiment, if you can, with different fueling strategies to see if you're blunting that fat oxidation. Because Stacy Sims says one thing and other people say something else for women, how they should fuel with some carbs before they work out, even if it's zone 2, to help burn fat. So I think test and not guess. So then we have Volek and Finney, their book, excuse me, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance is where I started going down these rabbit holes. You've also got Keto Gains, Low Carb Performance Information, 2017. Looking at ketones, looking at S fuels. There's all sorts of information from S fuels, from UCAN, there's Vitargo. I'm trying to look at different fuel sources for you. So how should you eat? This is an example from S fuels. Rice, potato, bananas. Are those good for you? Take a banana, taking high fat protein foods. When you're doing a long hike, what are foods that you can bring that are real food? Good prebiotic foods are cooked and cooled rice and potatoes. So boiling, they're called resistant starches. So if you can have a slow release carbohydrate that won't spike your glucose, you can do these rice balls, add in some fat with the butter and rice together, or your potatoes, and add some salt. You can do a cooked and cool to make them into balls. You can, look at all these different recipes on resistant starches. If you're doing a adventure race or multi-stage race, ultra endurance events, because you're training your body, your fat oxidation system, to get used to burning fat and having some carbs on board. Okay, so total training volume versus training intensity, differences here. You're getting volume increase in that mitochondria, but we want to improve the mitochondria function. So we got capacity. And how do we get there? So go back and look at these videos I did a couple of years ago on this, Endure IQ, Dr. Dan Plews, his cycle. Base 1, if you're in your off season, do baseline. Start to pay attention. This is what I do with my clients. I watch their heart rate variability. I watch their continuous glucose monitors, a CGM. I'm monitoring what they're eating. We're working together to help learn what is best for you. Again, N equals 1, and you are the expert of you. You need to learn this. I'm just guiding you. You're the expert. I'm the coach. Now we get to phase 2. Let's talk about what are your other options. If that's not ideal, what could you do, eat instead? So baby steps, working on nutrient dense whole foods. We're there for a little bit. Now we're preparing to switch from whole foods nutrient dense diet to maybe a little easier workout time and going what's called cold keto. This is what's called a fat adaptation process. So maybe you're here 2 weeks at a time for women, matching their cycle. We'll go into that next, or 3 weeks for men. 70% fat, 50% carbs, and getting their proteins. So your animal proteins, your fats, nuts, seeds, non-starchy vegetables. Females go days 7 to 14 on their cycle, do 2-week block. That would be more 1 week, but break it up. All right, so then baseline. We're watching your heart rate variability. Did you know that heart rate variability is a measurement of your vagal tone? The vagal nerve connects your brain to your gut to your brain. So these signals are going back. We can measure that resiliency, that strength of your vagal tone. I've got lots of interviews coming up on this. And this can help us by looking at your heart rate variability score. If you have a low heart rate variability, it's not as good. We want a higher rate variability. So if you are changing what you're eating, if you have food sensitivities, you're eating foods that are not good for your body, the heart rate variability might drop. Heart rate might go up. Glucose levels, we want to look at that. Food diary, we want to look at your mood, your poop, your energy. How's your sleep quality? And timing your meals so you can stop eating before bedtime. So we want to figure out your normal ranges and habits, start to understand how food works for you. So we're collecting data. We're just learning about your food, what you eat, when, why, how, where. Then we go into stage 2, switching more nutrient-dense foods, avoiding processed foods, vegetable oils, foods that you're able to prepare. You're not buying packaged stuff with a barcode. We're not really adjusting macros. We're just getting rid of the junk. We're trying to eat real food. So baby steps, remember, base hits, create a home run rather than always trying to get that home run. Learning how real food tastes, creating new habits. There's a list we can go, Professor Tim Noakes has that great chart of green foods and orange foods to what to eat. Continue testing heart rate variability and glucose. Because if your carbs go too low too quickly because you haven't adjusted, heart rate variability can lower. Or if you're high training loads or you're reactive to foods, your heart rate variability will lower. So increasing glucose, if your carbs are going too low too fast before you're able to make ketones by your liver, this can be a stressor. Stress increases cortisol. Cortisol increases glucose. So you're going to see this rabbit hole or hamster wheel, wrong animal, hamster wheel of going into this glucose roller coaster. So we need to adjust. So 2 weeks here, and then transition into 2 to 3 weeks of cold keto, maybe 4 weeks. But females that are cycling should be matching to their cycle. So, we're not focused being up in strict ketosis, but just showing maybe like 0.5 on Keto Mojo tracking. So I hate the word keto. I always have, but I like to think of it as getting nutrient-dense foods that balance your blood sugar. So now in this phase, be fat adapted phase, not saying keto, that we're focusing on protein and fat. Your carbs go lower, but again, we talked beginning of the seminar today, having your carbs based on your workouts. So going back to what fuel source we use at different workouts, we want to burn fat. So we need to keep zone 1 and 2, easy peasy workouts, recovery. So we're in that cold keto 2 weeks to 4 weeks. All right. We're measuring, tracking, learning. We're in this nutrient dense, higher fat and protein to make you feel full, satiated. So fat and protein are up, carbs are down. So your workouts are low. Now, Dan Plews, this is a few years ago now, but he would say, have enough fat coffee with your MCT and collagen in. And then post-workout, he's getting his carbs from broccoli, fat from coconut oil, fatty fish, sardines, and eggs. You get everything. You get your fat and your protein. Fat-soluble vitamins are all in the egg yolk, so eat that egg yolk. Then he has another coffee and cream. Then maybe he had a snack as S Fuels bar or some almonds. He's doing another workout. Salmon, olive oil, avocado, asparagus, another meal. And then another meal. So he's got 3 meals here. See, sounds like you're eating so much because so many of us do not eat enough. So, plus this is Dan, who's probably doing a ton of exercise, very active. So steak, simple salad plus dark chocolate. He's having 50 grams a day. So his carbs are coming from asparagus, getting a little bit in the almonds and the S Fuels bars a little bit. Broccoli. Sounds like a ton of food. I just ate my lunch and had a bowl of barbecue meat and some olive oil and sea salt on it. Had a yummy meal. I had a little cup of crackers from gluten-free seeded crackers. So yeah, at Trader Joe's. Now, HRV, good to go back to this. If it's decreasing, this happens when you're transitioning from a high standard American diet to a lower carb. So, might see this change in the stress in your body in these 3 weeks. Glucose may be higher because remember, high cortisol's body increases ketones. We're talking about the high cortisol because of stress. Your body's under while your body learns how to make ketones in your liver. Higher intensity workouts may be good for you during this cold keto phase, helps your body keep adapting. So it's normal to have lower performance, but he suggested in the course to do some sprint interval training to deplete that glycogen stores. Now, if it's high intensity workout, that'd be more the creatine phosphate would be more short, intense 10 to 30-second sprints. But higher intensity fuel source is more the glycogen stores in your muscles. That's the 45 seconds, minute to 2 minutes. Sleep. Got to keep talking about sleep more on this show. Sleep can be disrupting, carb timing at night. So if you have trouble sleeping and you're hungry before bed, maybe some carbs, like 10 grams help you sleep. So you can have some elements, some electrolytes, some water, and maybe a little bit of some berries. So what's element and rheolite? There are potassium, salt, magnesium, electrolytes combined. Keto Chow has a new one out. So some people who switch from a high to low carb diet maybe transition what we used to always call keto flu. You just might need some more electrolytes because you're losing carbohydrates or with water when they're stored. And so you lose water and you're losing electrolytes. So finding that sweet spot, low carb, high fat protein, maybe you're going back up after you become fat adapted. Maybe we need to do the lumen and test where you are burning fat, but 100 to 130 to 200 grams of carbs. So finding out what works best for you, this is where you're adjusting 50 to 130 grams to 200. For some people, as I said, if the more active they are, but some people are better at carb metabolism. And this is another idea you can gain from your genetic report as the DNA company or Precision Medicine's Wild Health Clarity Report. So adjusting macros during your phases for women, so you can learn a lot. So again, matching your training during these phases, baseline, normal program, we're just learning phase 2, you might need to reduce your volume. Phase 3, we're doing a good recovery, adding a little bit of HIIT training in there. And then phase 4, you're doing the sweet spot. Your training comes back up, and then you start to go training schedule and try to keep this new plan. Now, what are some good carbohydrates? I like doing potatoes. I was low in potassium when I did a hair tissue mineral test. I've been adding potatoes back in my body, beetroots, onions, carrots, those underground vegetables. So a lot of people say avoid starchy carbs, but these are the good carbs. I think they're good for athletes. And they're not a lot of the high oxalate, lectins, phytate type of foods. Well, onions can be bad for some people, but heart rate variability, again, track that. Carbs too low or training intensity too high, get feedback from there. Tracking your glucose with Keto Mojo or NutriSense or levels. If your carbs are too high or underlying inflammation, high intensity, lack of recovery, you can see that glucose levels high. High intensity in training, your performance going downhill. If you've been doing this for a while, you might want to add a little more carbs before your workout, as we're talking about, if your performance is getting worse, or during the workout or after. So experiment with adding before and during, after workout. And then more orange foods on the list. You can look up the food list of Noakes Foundation has. The orange foods are kind of the green foods to go for, but then adding more workouts as vegetables, squash, beetroot, vegetables, 20 grams a day. So I was looking at this. Okay, what is 20 grams? Well, potatoes obviously have the highest on here. Parsnips are pretty high, sweet potatoes. So we call this strategic carb timing. So when we're working out a little higher, standard high carb diet, people are having 50 to 60% carb. Maybe we're down 20 to 30%. We're getting more protein, we're getting fat, maybe 50, 30, 30. So look at everyone's different. So strategic carbs, when you're doing a more intense workout, you want to get the sprint interval training. I want to get faster. I want to get more powerful. We want to look at that not all carbs are evil. Insulin's an anabolic hormone. So when used sparingly in an insulin sensitive environment, this anabolic state, insulin helps build your muscles and cells. So occasional hits of carbs help drive anabolic building, is anabolic, catabolic's breakdown of insulin results in improved performance without affecting fat metabolism. So looking at this strategic carbohydrates, I think is important for athletes. And that's why we have to know when people are doing fasted podcasts and blogs and talking about fasting and ketosis, that it's going to be a little different from those that are fit and active. So the main goal, I think, is to focus on nature's carbs, not getting cookies and, well, I just had some crackers, but they were good from Trader Joe's, those seeded crackers, pasta, biscotti, scones, bagels, muffins, all that stuff's not ideal. Read the ingredient label, make sure you can understand everything. It's not junk in it. It doesn't have vegetable oils, inflammatory omega-6, fatty acids, processed food allergens, refined sugars. Vespa, we've talked to Peter Defty many times in the past, but listen to Peter's OFM, Optimal Fat Metabolism. So great information and blogs he puts out. Some concentrate carbs in your diet, help fueling for performance, add a little extra punch without causing damage. S fuels, good sources. I've been doing raspberries and blueberries and blackberries right now because they're in season. Avocados, but strategically adding carbs around your workout, intensity, duration, and your hormones. So safe starches we talked about, they're minimal anti-nutrients, safe starches, because we've done a podcast on phytates, oxalates, lectins. That's why a lot of people go to carnivore because they can't handle the grains, the nuts, the seeds, legumes, nightshades. Safe starches, interesting concept here. White rice versus brown rice. Don't you always think brown rice is better for you because it's not processed? Brown rice is the bran, the hull, the husk, where the anti-nutrients are. So white rice, fun fact, is actually a better option. And remember, rice cooked and cooled is more that resistant starch. So plants contain that protective mechanism known as anti-nutrients that discourages their consumption by mammals, and that includes us. So safe starches contain minimal to no anti-nutrients, as I said, especially compared to other varieties of plants. So sweet potatoes, yams, taro root, cassava, yucca, tapioca, plantains. Now, potatoes are a nightshade, so some people are more sensitive to that. So I don't have foods. I try to do everything, ideally these kind of foods, once a week or do a 4-day rotation diet. This comes from years ago, The Perfect Health Diet, Paul Jaminet. It's been a long time. Paleo Mom article and what is a safe starch. What is a 30 to 50 grams of carbs? We've heard that Dr. Gabrielle Lyon actually is the one that said, if you are doing meal, you're trying to get 30, 50 grams of protein, fat, you have to adjust to feel full and satiated. And then your carbs are going to be based on no more than 30 grams at one time. Athletes, maybe we work on experimenting where these go. So if I could zoom in, we've got cassava, acorn squash, sweet potatoes, tomatoes. My body hasn't wanted, so I think I'm reactive to them because my body doesn't want it. So listening to your body, like, that doesn't sound good to me. Maybe that's tomatoes for you. Sweet potato, obviously 41.2 grams, 38 net grams of carbs, a little higher, 38 in squashes. So the squashes, cassava, way more. 1 cup serving. So just note that maybe just a little bit, but butternut squash, good option. Pumpkin, potatoes, corn. If you're reactive to wheat, as I am, corn, you might realize doesn't go too well in your body. So pay attention to corn. Onion, some people don't do well. Artichokes, leeks, rutabaga. I don't even know how to cook that. I don't do the cooking anyways. My husband does. But spaghetti, squash, green beans, okra. I've actually think I've had those before. Turnips. So just something to think about on what are carbs, because that's what a lot of times people don't know what vegetables are good to eat that don't cause problems in your gut or anti-nutrients that pull minerals out. So I'm gonna zoom out. Okay. So another thing of carbs, adding in if you're doing a race or hit training, if you're in luteal phase, maybe women need a little bit more. That won't cause the blood sugar to go up, but that's another chart. Highest one, yellow sweet corn, 30 grams of carbs. What else? Highest one, avocado, total carbs. Huh. Carrots chopped, Brussels sprouts, eggplant. So there's some options. So years ago, we interviewed Rob Wolf. He has a great book, and you can read that Wired to Eat. It's a carb tolerance test that I've talked about before in the past. Just to review, you take 50 grams of effective carbs first thing in the morning. This is what you're going to eat, that 50 grams of that carb. Eat no other food at this time. Only can allow water, black coffee. Make sure you just have the same thing. So it's something consistent every day. Set what you ate, timer 2 hours, test your blood glucose and record it. 7-day test. So good to test out, does that food, how's it work in my body? Now, we've also talked before about carb cycling was a thing. I don't know if people do that still anymore, but that is that once a week you do a refeed. And this is controversial as well. Everyone's different. If you have sensitivity carbs or if you have food addiction issues, for me, it's good that I'm reactive to wheat because bread is a trigger for me. Anything like chips or bread, scones, stuff like that, I could not get full and eat too much. So there's certain things that a refeed doesn't mean binge, and it doesn't mean have foods that you can't control yourself and set yourself into a binge fast. And then it's like weeks later, you're struggling. So be careful. Carb cycling, it might be carb refeed of just you're having more starchy vegetables that day. So you do 6-day low carb, then 1 day moderately high, kind of match that on your high intensity day or a long bike ride. Typically we do long run on Sundays or Saturdays, long bike rides. So that's where you could add in, which I do intuitively. I just, to keep this way of eating that I like real food. I don't like crap and processed foods, but weekends I just kind of eat whatever. I'm a little more disciplined that I just focus on hitting that protein goal during the week. Okay, so what do you do training? So this was a couple different articles on Dan Plu's. Go back. Carb cycling. We talked about why was this option 2? I don't know. The slide's out of place, but racing, how you train low, race low. So you keep your carbs low, and race day, you're having a little bit more leading up to the race. We'll go into that. So training types, how to match your fueling. So looking at just how we want to look at training overall, if you're doing 80%, doing 80-20, I know as I age, I don't need 80% zone 2. So I've shifted that more 50-50 maybe. So it depends on where you are in your career. If you need more of this 80-20 rule, or if you need more to have the 60-40, I think it's different for women. We need to track and match your cycle with your workouts and nutrition. Maybe look at your age. I don't need as much zone 2, as I said. I need more speed work because I'm getting slower. So that's, recovery is really important for me based on my genetics. So doing zone 1, zone 2, and then figure that out. So great information from S Fuels and women. We've done lots of episodes on here, female athletes, mapping it out during your cycle. But then, all of it's just training, matching your fueling and training. When you're doing a higher intensity workout, what to have. So you can look at S Fuels, having some resistant starches, cooked and cooled rice, potatoes, maybe have a little bit of that. Looking at your genetics, as I just did reading keto, Wild Health Precision Medicine's clarity report. So it's just really good information to figure out what to do. And S Fuels has training program. They just switched their program to zone 2 fuel, zone 4, zone 5, looking at, pre-workout, if you want a Vespa or some fuel beforehand. Again, we talked a lot about fasted training today in previous episodes, but this is what we can talk about with your coach and looking at S Fuel's guidelines. They had some good charts on there, and looking at their train is more going to be their zone 2 fuel now. Their race plus drink is going to be probably more zone 4, and zone 5 drink is their race and gel. So looking at that option, there's, I was looking at Vitargo and Martin gels, and UCAN, someone wanted to know more on. UCAN is a slow release fuel source made from the starch, modified starch. So cornstarch isn't a problem for you. It's some people have gas in their belly. So it's an option, but S Fuels Train or S Fuels Zone 2, you can look at. That doesn't have a lot of calories in it. So you might need a little bit more. Maybe a bar is what I take on a bike ride. If I'm racing, might have something else on top of this with other sources as a gel. So you can look at S Fuels Primed. Again, these are all different names now. They've reformulated to add some different fuel. You can listen to my podcast, Dr. Mickey, and you can look at Ketone IQ. We did many episodes with Lat on Ketone IQ, having that before a workout and afterwards help recovery. So it's going to be good, beneficial for a long bike ride, I think, in the middle to help with mental focus and attention. But there's some great info. And then we've talked a ton about matching fueling and training. And I guess this is more so what I work with individually on clients and testing, making sure we're avoiding that GI stress from eating too much carbs beforehand and too many bars and sugary gels, and really figuring out what works best for them, especially if you're wheat sensitive. Maybe you're not able to tolerate the maltodextrin. So training for a race, tapering, we want to look at nothing new race day. This is me back when I raced. Look at those muscles. So you never appreciate being fit and lean until you stop racing, going, oh, I was needed to lose weight. And then I realized, hey, I was leaner as I've been, and I was always complaining. So appreciate what you have when you're racing. Don't be down on yourself as I always was. So tapering race day, one example, finding your sweet spot, how many carbs you need. And then this is a great chart. Tapering for a race day, 3 days before, you would add 50 grams more in your, say, evening meal. 2 days. So maybe you were at, your sweet spot was 100 grams a day is your typical average. So then you're at 150 grams. And then you're going up to 200 grams 2 days before, and then the day before, 200 grams. That's a good example. Remember, you are different, so experiment. Whole foods, not eating the processed, not eating white flour, refined sugars. So it's a good chart. If fat adapted, gradually increase carbs, real food, nature's carbs, leading up to that race to fill up your glycogen stores. And then the race day, Dan Plews used to say in the program that, not doing a lot of carbs right beforehand, start to put those carbs in when you get onto that bike ride. So this is where we can figure out your calories you're burning, very estimated when we do your metabolic test on the bike and a treadmill. Okay, so again, you want to finish, or do you want to be top of your age group? Are you racing high heart rate or a little bit lower? So that's going to be changing too. So again, tapering starts usually 3 weeks to 1 week. You're breaking down volume. The intensity usually goes up, or you keep it. And the volume goes down. So you have keep training sessions, nothing new race day. Dan Plews gave example in the course on his blog and programs he's spoken before, kind of the race day, rest day the next day, but just kind of what he would do the week of, say, an Ironman. And then tapering, increasing the carbs, race day morning, avoid foods that spike your insulin, inhibit fat burning as superstarch, top off liver glycogen stores. So having a superstarch as UCAN or S fuels beforehand. Vitargo might be something some people like. Race with some carbs if competitive and over zone 1, 2. So if you're in zone 3, you need to add more carbs. So aim for 50 to 60 grams max if you're racing per hour on the bike. Every 20 minutes, maybe you're having 20 grams of carbs. I do better having pieces of a bar or a little bit of carbs at once, not eating 60 grams at once. So every 20 minutes, you're having something is a good example. Find charts on S Fuels and EndureIQ, different plans. So looking at how well you are fat adapted, or you more carb burning athlete, you might have more GI stress problems. You might be burning too many carbs and not depending on fat for fuel. So looking at what to eat, what are ideas for meals, there's always something to talk about together. Dan had some examples on his S Fuels page and videos he's done. Having some porridge, 2 scoops of highly modified starch, post swim, 20 grams, 50, 60 grams per hour on the bike, 110 grams an hour of fuel. So, you're racing, it's going to be different than if you're just trying to finish. So race morning, your liver glycogen stores are lower overnight, but your muscle glycogens are higher. So race morning, you top off your liver glycogen stores. Looking at a slow release starch versus a maltodextrin. If you eat sugar and pre-workout, the first directs is you'll increase insulin, decrease fat metabolism, and you'll shut down free fatty acid circulation and increase glucose. So you're eating from your endogenous carb stores during the swim more than you need to. So that's why it's suggested not to have the fat, not eat food that spikes your glucose up and increases insulin, because you will start to use those carbs in your muscle glycogen storage that you want to save for later, versus if you had a slow release starches you can drink. Solution, become low glycemic spike-free foods as porridge, 2 scoops of highly modified starch, non-refined low glycemic food. So example of what Dan did. So again, testing oxidation rate, that would be helpful. CGM, when you're exercising in a race situation, 60 grams carbs when you're burning fat and carbs in a race. So this is racing. Now this is going to be different, and your training might not have that many carbs. I wouldn't, you're training low, racing high. So fueling examples he's given, and then recovery and repair is super important to help for decreasing that oxidative stress that we get from exercise, the increased inflammation, muscle tissue injury, your cortisol's higher, sympathetic nervous system. So you'll see that heart rate variability score drop after hard workout or a race, and your immune resistance is decreased. Gut integrity is increased. Leaky gut, your parasympathetic nervous system response is down because we're in sympathetic dominance. So your heart rate variability is going to be lower. So there is a reason I've been talking about gut health on this podcast and talking about leaky gut and heart rate variability, vagal tone, vagal nerve, because athletes, you're training and racing, you're going to be increasing these stressors, decreasing your immune system, your gut health, your recovery. So you want to look at sympathetic overdrive, looking at your cortisol, you're breaking down your muscles. So we want to look at all these inflammatory markers, interleukin-6, TNF alpha. Endurance exercise can more than double the level of these inflammatory markers compared to your pre-exercise level. So just remember, you are racing, you are training hard. Endurance training, what does it say? Raises reactive oxygen species or free radicals, which cause lipid peroxidation, cell wall breakdown. The body has many enzymes to manage free radicals, but most post-ultra race levels can reach almost 90% over pre-race levels. Aside from acute inflammation, free radicals have been directly related to chronic disease. Why do we need to work on oxidative stress? Reactive oxygen species, they're increased 90% over than before you race. That's endurance training and racing. There's a reason, again, why I do what I do with functional lab test assessment health investigation, because 90%, that's a lot. Sympathetic overdrive, cortisol, weight gain, slow healing, muscle weakness. This is my adrenal exhaustion I had happen 2013. So when you're racing, as I did when I got adrenal fatigue a lot, and my races were Ironmans, 50K, trail runs, marathons, cycling events. Jeez, this is all coming together. It's taking me this long. Look at what happens. It's not good for us. So you need to do something about controlling all this. What can you do? So recovery, muscle damage, connective tissue, muscle breakdown. We have oxidative stress damage. We have increase in our cortisol and gut health, leaky gut. So we want to look at protection. So we've learned about whey protein isolate, polyphenols, adding in some good fiber to feed your microbiome, vitamin C, L-glutamine's in the products of the S field because it helps amino acid help the mucosal barrier. Collagen, vitamin C together is beneficial for the gut. Quality proteins as eggs, whey, cold water fish, and others. You can listen to my 3 different podcasts with Perfect Aminos, Doctor, and the doctor for behind Perfect Aminos, body health, and then foods, nutritional therapy, papaya, strawberry, blueberry, broccoli, bell peppers, good vitamin C. High sugar foods, refined carbs you want to avoid. But what do you see athletes eating after workout? Not this stuff. They're eating the sugar and the refined carbs. So going back to all that happens, we want to look at fueling properly post-workout. This is where the stress happens. Immune resistance, parasympathetic tone, heart rate variability. Something to think about. Move my picture. Parasympathetic tone. This is why we're talking about heart rate variability. Parasympathetic system, body functions slowing down the heart rate, rest, gut, GI motility, secretions become weak and disorderly. Sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic tone declines. Right? So measure, get your labs tested, but work on recovery, work on, H2 tabs, hydrogen tabs, antioxidants. So looking at my many ebooks, been out for a while on my website, wpotts.net. You look at S fuels training, lots of podcasts we did on nitric oxide, looking at different fuel sources, avoiding fructose maltodextrin consumption that can suppress this GLUT4 transporter to get glucose into your muscle cells. So looking at the guide, looking at fuels, testing and not guessing, testing for insulin resistance, CRP levels, insulin, uric acid, ALT, AST, good for your liver enzymes. Triglycerides we want to look at. Fasting insulin under 5. This is 2 to 8, but we look at under 5. Glucose, keeping average 70 to 90. Higher after meal if the glucose is higher, the insulin's not bringing down glucose fast enough. So check it out. Well, that's 2022, that's old. But head over to my website, wpotts.net. You can learn more how to get healthy, and we can figure out what's best for you. Thanks for listening.